His Excellency, Mr. Paolo Gentiloni, Prime Minister of Italy, His Excellency Ambassador Lorenzo Angeloni, Ambassador of Italy to India, other distinguished delegates of the Italian delegation, Excellencies, colleagues, friends, and patrons. On behalf of the Observer Research Foundation, it is my privilege to welcome you all this evening to a talk by His Excellency Prime Minister Gentiloni on Italy, the EU and India, a strong partnership in a time of global challenges. India and EU, as noted recently by the EU Ambassador to India, are natural partners with both sharing the common values of democracy, internal diversity, and respect to human rights and rule-based international order. The convergence of interest today in the changing global realities provides a strong rationale to further deepen the strategic partnership between the two. The recently concluded summit was an effort aimed at expanding the relation in security and strategic domain as well. So far, economics and trade has been a major driver of relations between India and the EU, which gained momentum after the launch of the EU-India Strategic Partnership in 2004 and the Joint Action Plan in 2005. EU today is India's biggest trading partner with share of almost 13.5% of India's overall trade with the world, while India is EU's 9th trading partner with 2.2% of EU's overall trade as of 2016. After a phase of relative slowdown in the momentum between the two, there is opportunity for both to build on the existing relation and extend it to the spheres of common interest, with development being the prime driver of Prime Minister Modi's foreign policy, with flagship programs like Make in India, smart cities, skilling initiatives, and focus on the infrastructure and rural growth. There is a lot of potential for EU and India to have meaningful partnership in these schemes and programs. Of course, our different economic evolution also poses some challenges in reconciling our trading expectations. But as India grows and EU recognizes its essential role in the EU economy, many differences are likely to be reconciled. With individuals, members like Italy, India can work in achieving this. Counter-terrorism is a critical area where India and EU can cooperate to tackle the menace collectively. India has long been cautioning the world from various international fora regarding the nature and threat terrorism poses to international peace and security. With increasing terrorist networks and multiple avenues available for proliferation of terrorist ideologies, the world is witnessing unprecedented threat of extremism, violence, and radicalism across the globe. It is therefore imperative to deal with it collectively. This is an important area where both can work together to build substantial consensus and ensure an early adoption of UN Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism. On defense and security, India has so far dealt with individual states of EU having robust arrangement with countries like Germany and France. There is potential to expand the security cooperation among the two. Maritime security and counter-piracy is an important area where cooperation can be strengthened without much effort. This is an important area for both. In the recent summit, India and the EU reaffirmed their commitment to enhance maritime security cooperation in the Indian Ocean and beyond. Both sides noted The recent joint maneuvers, that is PASEX, between the EU Naval Force and Indian Navy off the coast of Somalia as a successful example of naval cooperation. It is in the interest of both EU and India to have security, stability, and open seas in the context of developing the blue economy. Afghanistan also provides an opportunity for the cooperation between the two, as both could work together in many areas, including regional cooperation, capacity building, police and military training, higher education, and strengthening institutions of democracy. Italy is the fourth largest trade partner of India amongst all the EU countries, with a number of Italian companies operating in India. Given robust manufacturing capabilities, Italy can be a crucial partner of India in Prime Minister Modi's Make in India initiative. The two-way trade between the countries stood at US dollars 8.28 billion in the year 2015-16. India has attracted US dollars 2.23 billion foreign direct investment from Italy during April 2000 and December 2016. Major Italian brands like Fiat, Piaggio, Ferrero, Vespa have been in Indian markets for long, and there is room to increase this engagement. For instance, Ferrero that recently announced its intention of doubling its investment in India. The challenge posed by climate change is now dominating international debates, and countries are searching for solutions and for alternative energy resources. Italy, being one of the world's largest producers of renewable energy, can be a valuable partner for India in its effort to sustainable and environment-friendly development initiatives. India's growing demand for energy and Italy's experience in renewable energy offers a lot of scope and a vast area of partnership. This will help both countries and the world. Mr. Prime Minister, your much-awaited visit to India promises to infuse a new energy and direction in our bilaterals, and we at the Observer Research Foundation are hopeful that the two countries will continue to grow their cooperation for the benefit of their people and in the service of the larger global community. Without further ado, it is my honor and privilege to invite His Excellency, Mr. Paolo Gentiloni, Prime Minister of Italy, to give this evening's special address. Prime Minister, sir.
Well, thank you very much, dear Vice Presidents, Ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, honorable guests. Our chairman said that the visit was much awaited. In fact, it is from 10 years that an Italian Prime Minister was not visiting India, and this gives to this visit, from our point of view, a very special interest. And for me, it's a special honor to be your host today, because I've always admired the important work of organizations like yours that bridge between academic research and politics, between politicians and thinkers. We need this link because we are living in a difficult transition. Geopolitical instability is still present. At the same time, economic dynamism and in Europe, a renewed sentiment of trust for our common journey are feeding hopes that we are heading towards better times. So on the one hand, we have still instability and unpredictable scenarios in many areas, and on the other hand, we have good economic perspective. This latter reflection might be considered unimportant from the perspective of the spectacular ongoing economic rise of India. India's GDP is almost 5 times higher than it was in 2000. However, as Europeans, we waited for long years the comeback of economic growth in all the European Union. In fact, our European societies have undergone 10 very difficult years. For the first time in our history, a country that you know very well, the UK, has chosen to leave the European Union, and the process of Brexit has just started. It would be a difficult process, and it will create uncertainty, especially for UK. At the same time, we saw the emergence of populism. We call it populism, and everyone could have a different definition, which I tend to understand as nihilism, the loss of faith in the capacity of our democracy to fix the wrongs that occur. These phenomena are all part of the complex net of consequences of the economic crisis started in 2007, and that Italy, for example, ended only in 2014 with a modest recovery that is now finally accelerating. We are fighting challenges on many fronts. We face an unstable geopolitical scenario in which reasons of concerns are not decreasing. We could mention North Korea and the international threat, a threat that is similar in a certain way from Western Africa to Asia. We are particularly focused in North Africa and the Middle East with the view of finding a reasonable and equitable way to build a long-term and long-lasting stabilization. We want to see Africa thrive socially and economically. Also because this is the only way to manage migration flows without giving up to our principles and our humanity. Geopolitics, however, is more than global tensions. In current times, geopolitics brings about global opportunities. Global trade is again on the rise. Large infrastructural projects in your country and a renewed focus on investments in Europe will offer important chances of cooperation. Over 500 Italian companies operate already in India, and roughly 150 Indian companies are in Italy. These numbers are promising, but we can and will do much better. A few large Italian companies, business federations, and the Italian Trade Agency are with me in this visit. And they are having a dense agenda with the Indian counterparts, including a very interesting meeting with Prime Minister Modi. More companies will join other official visits in India in the coming weeks, beginning at the end of this week. As governmental officials, we offer our support and encouragement, and I'm sure the private sector will be quick to grab every opportunity. There are many sectors in which Italy and India can benefit from each other's talent and expertise, from infrastructures to agri-food, from machine tools to energy and green technologies. It is not only about business and not only even about India and Italy. The more we are able to strengthen and develop inclusive economic growth in an open global market based on the rule of law and the principle of economic inclusion, the more the international tensions will tend to subdue. While engaged in challenging geopolitical fronts, even at home, we are experiencing a good and stable outlook in our European economies. In the current year, economic forecasts for Italy have been constantly amended with increasing numbers, reaching now an expected 1.5% growth for 2017. Since 2014, Our economy created almost 1 million new jobs, and more people moved from being discouraged and inactive to seeking employment in Italy. Foreign investment levels, including the Indian ones, are at an historical high. Exports are rising fast by 8.4% compared to the previous year. In 2016, bilateral trade value between Italy and India reached $8.3 billion US dollars. And I am convinced that this year we will attend and we will reach a higher level. While machineries and chemical products prevail in Italian export towards India, our imports from India included metallurgy, chemistry, and clothing. Of course, the challenges of our two countries are not the same. We both answer to our modern challenges with vision, with reforms, with determination. While engaged in wide, often controversial discussions, Italy spent the last 4 years in a quite extraordinary reform effort. We changed our labor market laws, reformed our banking systems to improve competitiveness and transparency. We updated the justice system and our bureaucratic apparatus. We invested in public schools and apprenticeship. We have to be cautious and not to lose momentum in these reforming efforts, because they are relevant but they are not complete. In fact, one thing globalization taught us in the last 20 years, there is not room for being idle. Either country becomes a clear actor and finds a protagonist role in the globalized world, or it will suffer its consequences without enjoying any benefit. Ladies and gentlemen, a recent study stated that 3.2 billion people, that is 42% of the world population, lives currently in a middle-class condition. India is a global protagonist of this staggering result. In the next 5 years, the global middle class is expected to increase by a further billion people, and over one-third, 380 million people, will be Indian. Of course, this number goes to the merit of your government and your economy. I think it also gives long-term perspectives to both our countries and our future relationships. Our country is a tourist destination that the global middle class dreams of, and yours is as well. This summer, our museums, our cities, our beaches increased visitors by the double digit. India and Italy have been a constant source of cultural and spiritual inspiration, and this attractionability will only increase as more and more people will be able to afford to travel and meet their wishes for discovery. From an economic perspective, Italian companies produce goods that the global middle class generally wants to buy. Italian entrepreneurs are able to keep our country stable as the second largest manufacturing economy in Europe. The first is Germany. This long-term trend will meet also with your aspiration to increase your role as a manufacturing hub. Now is the time our knowledge in small and medium enterprises, in robots and technologies that suit the needs of production for a growing economy like yours, are of great interest and great use. But global trends also highlight a paradox we must face if we are to persist and to prevail in our effort of defining democracy against the threat of terrorism and the threat of nihilism and populism. In fact, while the world looks in its best shape ever from a distant perspective, nobody lives in a distant perspective. People live in real context. People are not numbers or statistics. We know that in our developed countries, many strata of the middle class and the low earner groups have suffered and are still suffering. It is a fact that you will not rejoice for the improving social conditions in the other side of the planet if your opportunities are shrinking. Your salary does not allow you to make ends meet if your kids look less fulfilled than you were at their age. It is a fact that inequality can be even sharper if it depends on unequal sets of opportunities that look intolerable. To make things harder, masters of illusion are always at work, making sure that the legitimate causes for anger and frustration are exploited to the bone. And they are promoting protectionism, they are blaming trade and globalization. Against this, there is no silver bullet. However, with the creative wisdom of politics, we can ensure that policies which support growth go hand in hand with those that support social inclusion. And this is key to the strengthening of long-term relationships between developed and newly emerged economies. Based on a dialogue among equals, we must figure out the best possible balance between domestic interest and international equilibrium, because they reinforce one another. Ladies and gentlemen, the efforts of the Italian government have two key drivers. On the one hand, we will continue to work to improve our domestic condition. The other inspiring point of reference for us is the world, through Europe and through special bilateral relationships. Brexit worked indeed as a wake-up call. The European project is one of stunning long-term success. It has established peace and prosperity in lands where war was the norm. But politics, again, is about the future. Decisions are taken on the new paths, not on the old ones. This is why we need stronger economic policies, not to increase spending, but to give meaningful answers to our citizens. We need, further, a common European policy on migration. Italy saved tens of thousands of lives at sea. The global phenomenon of migration sees us in the front line. On this, we need increasingly multilateral approaches, and we need to continue our efforts to disrupt the network of human trafficking. In this legislature, my predecessors and myself have undertaken an unprecedented effort of revamping and strengthening bilateral relations. In the global context, national identities crafted on culture, the economy, and the best traditions each has to offer are crucial in order to reach that balance of domestic and international order I was referring to earlier. We must reinforce and strengthen global trade based on the international fairness and transparency. At the same time, it is now very clear that trade alone is not enough. More has to be done to protect and to support families and individuals. More has to be done to foster cultural and personal exchanges. Both India and Italy have a lot to contribute to the world in this respect. India is the larger experiment of democratic rule in history, started with a process and a leadership that continues to inspire people all over the world. It faces the social and economic challenges of such a diverse country. Of course, the sizes of our two countries seem to make them incomparable. But I disagree. We host ancient civilizations. We are countries based on the generosity of our family culture, which find expression in a food culture that is more than taste, is the culture of caring. Our countries embed an amazing diversity. In some respect, we both are the entire world in one country. In the last 70 years, Italy did change many governments, but we have also been remarkably stable in our fundamentals. We reconstructed the country after the war. We experienced the greatest economic boom in our history. We defeated internal terrorism. We built a modern and dynamic economy, open to the world. We nurtured generations of scholars, intellectuals, artists. We took the choice of Europe since the beginnings. We are one of the 6 founding fathers of the EU project. And we reached the single currency since the beginning. And more recently, we were able to recover from the Great Recession while always fulfilling international duties, including the global effort to tackle climate change. In all those years, we attempted at squaring the circle of economic freedom with an inclusive society. I think that for both our countries, looking at the past makes us confident that persisting is a good strategy, that confidence in democracy is well placed, that our values, while built out of a meaningful tradition and inspiring leaders, are and always will be the drivers of our choices. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. We also have the presence of Mrs. Emanuela Gentiloni, the gracious wife of the Honorable Prime Minister. A big hand to her.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for a very thoughtful address. The Prime Minister has agreed to take a few questions. Let me call upon Shruti Pandalai from the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis. Could you ask a question? Please make it short because we won't have very much time.
Right. Thank you very much, Ambassador Sood. Your Excellency, thank you very much for that very eloquent exposition. I'm going to take off from some of the points that you've mentioned during your address and ask you directly. While the India-EU and the India-Italy relationship is growing, one of the other great partnerships that the EU has is with China. And I was wondering if you could give us a little direction in terms of your views on the trajectory of Chinese investments both in Italy and EU, and if at all there are any concerns of strategic implications of the same. Linking in with that, I'd like to ask you that do you feel that the internal cohesion within the EU is also under duress, because sometimes there are countries which come out with very pro-China positions like we saw with the Greece vote. So thank you very much.
Well, I think that the relations between EU and the main big economic players in the world are ongoing. There is not a single file that is completely solved and closed. We recently closed a very relevant file with Canada, with a relevant trade agreement, but the discussion with China is is a very open one, and the discussion with India is very positive but still open, and even the negotiations with part of Latin America, the so-called Mercosur alliance, is underway, but if I would say that we are closing the EU, I am speaking under the control of the EU ambassador, but I don't think that we are exactly at the end of this long-lasting discussion. So my answer will be on the Italian position. The Italian position is that we are, in general, in favor of these free trade agreements. So in the European balance, we are among those pushing in the direction of these agreements. Obviously, we also have our interests and our industrial sectors to protect. For example, in the discussion that took place with China on the market economy status, the Italian position was very clear on problems connected with steel production and so on. But I don't want to go too long on this. But the point I just wanted to add is that the different dossiers are at different level of speed. We have to be aware, and very frank on this, that we have to manage, and this is a recent phenomenon, a phenomenon of the last 3, 4, 5 years, the tendency in our societies, I mean the European societies, to a certain degree of skepticism on free global trade. So the idea of each country saying my national interest comes first is an idea that we can understand, but it is a little bit dangerous for the perspective of global trade. We are reaching compromises. For example, in the G7 that we had in Sicily in March, there was a big discussion on trade protectionism with the American president and other players, and at the end we found a good compromise. But the message is, yes, the Italian position is we are for pro-trade, against protectionism in general, not this country more than another, in general, but we have to take in account the fact that I'm not blaming this or another country. There are several countries that tend to put their own national interest a little bit before the global trade. And this is not good for countries like Italy, like Germany, like many others, export-oriented, and it is not good for emerging economies, because emerging economies have had an enormous advantage from global trade. So we have the same interest, EU and India, for example, to promote, defend global trade and not to accept a protectionism resilience. Thank you.
Another question. Kabir?
Thank you, Ambassador Sood, and thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for a very informative session. I'm just going to, my name is Kabir Taneja, I'm Associate Fellow with the Observer Research Foundation. I'm just going to pick up from a brief point that you made. India being an emerging power and a coming up economy, how do you see, or how does Italy see, and the EU see, India's role in conflict resolution around the world? And specifically with India being part of newer multilateral platforms such as BRICS, how do you see India playing a role in global conflict resolution such as Syria, or even global conflict negotiations such as the ones we had with Iran? Thank you.
Could you only repeat the last? How do I see the role of India in
global conflict resolution, specifically in areas of concern such in the Middle East, such as Syria?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not in the position to discuss the global role of India. This is more for an academic than for a prime minister, but I can discuss the Italian one. But generally speaking, I think that the international community has two relevant interests. One is and where India can play a decisive role. One is fighting terrorism and contributing to the international coalition against terrorism. What is remarkable is that now the terrorist threat is, you can have a line from the Gulf of Guinea to Asia, including the Mediterranean, and you will have a common terrorist threat with different names, different organizations, but a link which is not a religion, but it is a instrumental and criminal use of religious extremism for terrorism goals. So in this respect, a democracy, multi-religious, with a so huge dimension as India is in itself an extraordinary contribution to fight the causes of terrorism. Then we have the cooperation, the intelligence sharing, but the very existence of a democracy in this situation and with these characteristics is, from my point of view, absolutely strategic. The second point is India obviously is decisive to promote and maintain stability in this region, a region directly involving our European interests, not only because of the nuclear threat of this North Korea situation, but we are in any case, interested of the maintaining of the peace in Asia because of national reasons, economic reasons, maritime trade. I can explain it in 10 different ways. I think we have an opportunity because we have now the main Asian players with stable and strong leaderships. They have not the same vision of the world, absolutely not. But if you look to the 2 or 3 Asian superpowers, democracies, non-democracies, they have very strong leadership. And the right moment to work for stability is the moment when you have strong leaderships. I cannot add more on the Indian global political role. Thank you.
Thank you. Abhijit?
Thank you, Prime Minister. So my question to you is regarding Italy's relationship with your EU partners. Specifically, you're quite vocal in the fact that Russia needs to be incentivized over conflicts like Ukraine or Syria to back down. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about what incentives you see actually working with Russia, and second, what kind of tension does that lead to with allies that tend to be more hawkish on Russia, like say Poland or the Baltics or countries like that? Thank you.
Well, Russia is our eastern big neighbor as European Union, and so we need to have a relation with Russia. The problem is the quality of this relation. We all know that this relation changed dramatically in the last years because of the breaking of the international rules caused by the what happened in Ukraine, especially, and then what is the Italian position on the subject? We are convinced. I'd say we have always been convinced in these years of the necessity, on one side, to keep the unity of the European Union in condemning what was made in Ukraine and in supporting the solution that with this Minsk agreement was found, and at the same time to call for the maintaining of a political dialogue with Russia. Translating this, we are not convinced of the fact that the goal of this pressure could be a sort of illusion of changing the Russian political situation or the Russian leadership through our pressure. The goal of our pressure is to defend the international law and to explain to Russia that you cannot break this international law. But at the same time, I need to discuss with Russia several issues. And I need Russian cooperation in a few relevant Mediterranean and Middle East scenarios. So I think it is the diplomatic circles call this the double track strategy. We are convinced of the double track strategy, dialogue and a strong position. In Syria, the Italian position has always been a little bit more moderate than the position of other allies of our European Union. Not all of them, but many of them had the idea that a military solution of the Syrian crisis could be possible, and we were very skeptical. This was 5 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago. And then that no debate, no negotiation, no discussion could begin with United Nations without the fact that the Syrian dictator left the country. And again, we were suggesting the fact that, yes, this could be the end or the result of the process, but not the beginning of the process. Now, it is not the success of our policy, obviously, but the reality is that we are trying to discuss, and we are also trying to discuss with Bashar al-Assad to find solutions. I am sure that at the end, the real solution cannot be guaranteed by such a leadership, but I am also sure that if we don't open a dialogue, a negotiation, a discussion, we will never reach our goal. And our goal is to restore the Syrian entity. We have 3 million of Syrians in Turkey, 1.5 million of Syrians in Lebanon, a lot of Syrians in Europe. Syria is a devastated country. We need urgently, and also discussing with the regime, to restore a decent situation, to call for elections, and to have a new chance for those that were obliged to leave the country.
Thank you. I'm afraid the Italian authorities have already indicated that the Prime Minister has to leave, and so we will not be able to take any more questions, and I apologize for that. It just remains for me to thank Prime Minister Gentiloni, Madame Gentiloni, for having come here today, the Embassy of Italy, and the Italian Ambassador for having made this possible, and all of you. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for a very thoughtful address and for your patience in taking a diverse range of questions. And I hope that the interaction, the next visits, will not be after a long gap of 10 years, and it will become a regular.
I assure you.
Thank you. Thank you.